Screen looks good. Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Robin, thank you so much for the nice introduction. Thank you everybody for joining us today to talk about activity management. Users often complain about planning and tracking activities in Dynamics. I'll say CRM. I know that's a lot of different things these days, whether it's for sales or for marketing or for customer service or many of the other permutations. So this session is a walkthrough of the activity managers of Dynamics 365 and how to both efficiently use them out of the box, but also how to configure them and make them work better for your users so you can drive adoption with that. And a little bit of why that's even important, because there are different schools of thought on it. I come from the school of thought that this is incredibly important, not just for your business and the value of CRM, but actually for building the dynamic nature and employability and skill set of the people you support who are using Dynamics day in and day out. So I've got a lot of passion around this kind of weird subject of activity management, and I think you'll see some of that show through as we get into the presentation today. So activity management, it's boring, isn't it? I mean, all those funnel charts, pie graphs, and cool goal gauges are really cool, and managing activity is just kind of a hassle, it feels like. That's what we heard from one of our clients fairly recently. They said, look, we love to look up information, we like to enter orders, but entering activities, that doesn't feel helpful. That's just a time sink. There's a lot of praise for Dynamics, but there was not a lot of praise for activities. Well, flash forward about an hour into that same session with that same client, and the sales manager asked this: so what are the most powerful things you guys are getting out of CRM right now? This was to a sales team. Guess what answer they got that got the most votes? Someone said, I'm always surprised how long it's been since I was with a client last. I mean, I feel like I was there, or this was a little while ago, so we were still there, but flash forward or on the phone or emailed with them, just a few weeks ago. But I look it up and I realize it's been 2 months. They had a nice field there saying, when was the last time someone had contact with this customer? And virtually everyone in the meeting agreed that that is really cool. That's a great piece of information. Well, you probably know this, but they didn't. The way you get that information is by entering your activities in CRM. And so we've kind of found through a lot of analytics, and I think you'll even see Microsoft is come out with a lot of their underlying AI and other pieces of the application that are future facing are actually driven not by that more interesting information, but by this day-to-day boring interactive information about activities. Really interesting information if you get it entered well, and you can actually report out on it and do analytics. So question I have for you, rhetorical question. We don't have a lot of time to answer it, so you don't need to, if you want to say it out loud, you can. But when you think about your users in Dynamics, do your users need to follow up on 2 or more different types of records? Here's what I mean by that. You can see that right at the bottom of this. But for example, do you have some users who say, well, I have to do account management, so I have to follow up with them, but I also have to follow up with leads? Or I have to work my opportunity list, but I also work a lead list. Or maybe they work all 3 of those things. Or maybe some of them work with cases and others work with accounts and both of those things. So if your answer to that is, yeah, we've got users who need to manage their lists for follow-up in more than one place. Well, the interesting thing about that is as soon as you're managing your activity list, your follow-up list in more than one place, you have lost the ability to manage, control, and prioritize that activity list. You've got to have all of that in one place. And the way to do that in Dynamics is through activities, because we talk about CRM being a customer-centered system, and it is. Everything revolves around the customer, be that an account or a contact or even a lead. But it is also, and maybe even in a more real way, centered around activities, because every one of those lists of things that you need to take action on, they connect to activities, usually via the regarding field, sometimes via other fields as well. So activities are probably the most used, but the least optimized entity in Dynamics. They're really critically important. They're connected to virtually everything. And if you use them well, it gives your users more proactive capability to manage their lists and get the most important things done first, and follow up with other less important things later, instead of just doing the things that are reactive, constantly responding to the ringing phone, the inbound email, the request for an order. All of those might be good things, but sometimes they're drowning out something else. It's a much bigger opportunity for people to be working on. So helping them to be proactive and prioritize, really important part of this. So quick introduction to me. My name is Jeff Abels. I've been around this area for a very long time of what I would call sort of people-centric digital engagement. So working with customer service and sales teams and marketers, but even also working on internal digital engagement too. So helping out with things like Microsoft Teams and SharePoint and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my groove. I really like that stuff. I spend way more time doing it than I should. Written a couple of books on the topic, and recently became a Microsoft MVP as well. So that's exciting. On the personal side, if you want to get to know me a little bit better, here's one of my great motivations for doing all of those things. My wife and I are recent empty nesters. We love this stage of our lives. If you're not there yet, every stage is wonderful. This stage, we get to do a lot of fun stuff like have great wine together and do some touring and travel and ride our Harley Davidson together. We try not to do both of those at the same time. But our nest is empty, so we added Verdi in the lower left corner there. She's our new housemate that keeps us company all day long, and oftentimes she's asleep right next to me here in my home office during our COVID sheltering stage. Most exciting, our two daughters are now grown and married, and our youngest has given us this beautiful grandchild, Theodore Evergreen Tramolini, wearing a really cool shirt there. So a little bit about me, just in case you wanted to know that stuff. I hope I can get to know you guys better. I know I've probably talked to some of you before. If I haven't, glad to meet you. Please reach out and introduce yourself. There's my LinkedIn or my Twitter contact information. Super easy to find me on LinkedIn because my name's not spelled the way anyone else seems to spell theirs. So reach out, introduce yourselves, say hello. Even type it into the panel questions for the GoToMeeting if you want to. Okay, so I'm going to skip these because we have a lot of content to cover today. This is one way I try and get to know people better in this modern world where we're kind of a little overly webinared. But in the interest of getting you everything we need to get today, I'm going to skip over those things. So here's our outline for today. A lot of stuff to talk about. This topic of activity management seems simple. It's actually big. I could probably put together an 8-hour session on all the different things to think about with it, not just the technical things. In fact, the technical part is the easiest part of all this to get right, I think, and we'll talk some about it. So up front, I'm going to talk about why this is important and how to get a little bit of buy-in as you think about trying to get your team on board with it. Then I'll talk about how can you put a plan together to serve your team and make this easier. Then we'll talk about how do we set up CRM to actually deliver on this. Then, time permitting, we'll talk about adoption, and then we'll have some wrap-up topics to talk about as well. So, first topic, getting buy-in. So let me ask you this question just to think about out loud. Why manage activities? And notice I crossed out in CRM here. So if you're with me thinking along with this, what I ask you to think about is why forget CRM. Why is it important for anybody to manage activities anywhere at all? Right? And it's not always an easy question to answer, not as easy as we think it should be, because we get comfortable being reactive. We don't want to manage activities. Instead, we're very comfortable saying, I've got so much to do, I don't need to manage activities. But really, memory is one of them, right? Can you remember everything somebody said or everything you've committed to do? Don't we need checklists to remind ourselves to get stuff done? Do we want to be proactive and think about, well, when I make this call, what's my agenda? What do I want to accomplish with that? Do we want to be more exercise basic time management so we're not victimized by reacting all the time, but we actually start to take more control of our time? So those are all on an individual level. That might sound weird, but one of the things I run into oftentimes with this is it's not that people are great activity managers already, and now they're trying to move it into CRM. The problem is often they're not good at activity management at all, and they're very comfortable with that. And so one of the first things to get buy-in on is going back to this basics of why do we want to manage our schedule at all? Why do we want to manage activities? Then the next question we ask, and when we do workshops, we dig into this together, but then we ask, so now what are the benefits of taking that activity management and doing it inside of CRM, right? Things like collaboration, so we can understand who has large pending deals, what are our open service issues, how are those things working, who's interacting with the customer. Handoffs, it's time for sales to be done and someone else to pick things up. If they can look at that activity history, that can be super helpful. Data quality and completeness. Who is on that call again? When did I try to reach them? I can tell you a true life story for me as someone who handles business development for our own organization sometimes. I can start working down a list of people to call in the morning. And if I don't check that off as I'm rapidly going through a list and generally leaving messages because no one ever answers their phone, I come back in the afternoon. And even if I had that on the list, but I didn't check it off because I thought, well, I might want to call them again later, I don't remember if I even left them a message or not, right? And then it's this potentially embarrassing situation of why'd that guy leave me 2 messages in the same day, right? Possibly most importantly, though, is this idea of what I call relationship intelligence. And that goes along with some of the AI stuff that's built into Dynamics these days, too. So answering questions for you either proactively on your own or reactively with AI serving it up to you. Who haven't I called recently? When was the last time I had contact with this organization? My opening story that I shared. How many contacts does it take for us to close a sale, right? So one of our clients found that it takes an average of 5 attempts to contact a lead after they've filled out a request for quote form on their website. 5 contacts on average before that lead will actually convert and do business with them. And yet most of their salespeople are following up 1 to 3 times before giving up. You can't answer questions like that if you haven't done good activity management. And the reality is the answers to those questions are different for every organization, and they're changing all the time, right? As our marketplace changes, as things like COVID happens, all of that. Now, another thing to think about with this, if you're trying to drive activity management in Dynamics, whoever you are, you might be a sales manager on this call. You might be a CRM administrator. You might be a power user. You might be a rep yourself. My question to you is this: do you have and follow an activity management system? It's really tough to convert people if you're not already yourself converted, right? So what do you do for activity management? Are you typical? What typical is I've got some things on stickies and I've got some things in OneNote. I might have some things in Outlook tasks or To-Do or some other electronic organizer, and you've got different things all over the place, and you really don't have a consistent activity management system. So if you don't believe in the power of this strongly enough to do it yourself, how are you going to convince other people to do it? So no matter where you are, I'd encourage you to do that. And I'm not suggesting Dynamics is the right place for you. It might be different depending on what your role is within an organization. But I would say if usage of Dynamics is core to who you are and what you need to get done for your organization, that's probably where you need to think about doing this. If you want a little more ammunition for this before we jump into our next few topics, we wrote a blog on this. You can go grab this blog link. At the end of this, I give you my contact information again. So if you don't copy all this stuff down, just ping me with an email. I'll send you all the links and all the resources I share with you throughout the session today. There will be quite a few of them. So if you want to jot them all down, be quick or grab screen grabs or whatever, visit the recording afterwards, or if you just want them summarized, let me know. But this is a great little blog that gives you some of that information. So here's what typically happens to us, right? How we get into this reactive mode. We get into a vicious cycle. So we start life maybe straight out of school, or maybe in that new position we just landed in, a new employer or a new position with an existing employer, and we're very proactive, right? We set our goals, we review our plans, we get launched. I actually just talked to a marketer, great person who is with a client we work with. She's now going to a new place. This is exactly where she is. She's like, I've had a first full month here to go meet with people, understand this company, put out a roadmap for how I'm going to help move the whole marketing department forward. It's great. She's 100% proactive right now. It's a great stage. It feels really good. But then something terrible happens. And that terrible thing is all that proactivity pays off and we're successful. And the problem with good proactivity is it always leads to lots and lots of reactivity, right? So we think, oh, I need to get more proactive, but the problem is every proactive thing you do, it leads to a follow-up meeting. It leads to a follow-up request. It leads to a great reputation that has people coming back to you asking you to react to the things that they're asking for. We have all these different things that happen in our life when we're successful. And all of those things really consistently push us towards this becoming 100% reactive. And when we're reactive, what we really are is we are out of control. What we really are is we are relying on the success of that period in our lives when we were proactive to power us to go on without taking more control of guiding us, right? So one day we wake up and we say, all of a sudden, all that stuff that made me successful, it doesn't matter anymore. I don't have the skills that have been kept fresh. I don't have the new relationships I need to be on top of. My pipeline has emptied out because I'm so focused on the ones that were in there for so long. And so that reactive mode is a curse that if we let it go for too long, we're out of control of our lives, we're out of control of our customers, we're out of control of our own destiny. Either you empower your people to be proactive and take control of themselves, or they're giving up control to someone, you, their manager, their customer, whoever it is. So we need to, as a gift to the people we exist to serve, our coworkers, our employees, helping them move back towards taking some control. We'll never be 100% proactive again. We can't be, but we can be 5 to 20% proactive. And that's what activity management is all about, taking control of that sector that we can take control of, because that's what makes all the difference to the bottom line of our business and to the happiness of our users as well. So that's my why, and I get a little preachy about that why, but I think that that's really important. I think that I'm a big believer in we exist to serve our customers, we exist to serve our colleagues that we work with day in and day out, whether they report to us or whether they're peers. And if we can lay a hold of that and do that the right way, we're going to make amazing things happen. So there's a lot of ways to talk about that. Your manager may not respond to the whole message I just gave there, but there's lots of bits and pieces you can pull out to grab the stuff that's going to make sense in your organization. So with that vision in mind, what do we do? What's the plan? How do we start to move people towards this? And I know that we see things like dynamics and we think, hey, that's the easy button, right? We just kind of turn it on. We give people more training. We let them go. Here's a tool, go use it. I tell you, if you give me a whole box of tools and tell me to go build a house, or heck, for that matter, a shed, I'm not going to know where to start, right? It's just having the tool isn't enough. It's not easy. So I want to dispel that myth right now. We think, well, activity management, I mean, it's been built into this since day one. We just need to kind of deploy it and give it to people as a tool. There's a lot more that we need to do, both with our people and how we talk to them and work with them, and with the tool and how we configure it to make it work the way our people do. So let's talk about this in terms of a plan. I like to begin with the end in mind, right? So here's a vision for the plan we put in place, and then we'll talk about how we use CRM to help implement that plan. So a good rhythm for becoming more proactive, for becoming good activity managers, is you start with scheduling. Now, depending on your role in the organization, the type of organization you're in, timing might be a little bit different. There might be a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual rhythm, or some combination of all those things. In fact, I do a whole separate session. I'll be doing it at the User Group Summit in a couple of weeks here on using CRM to run your sales meetings. And it talks about another part of this cadence as well. But this is the individual part of the cadence. So when you talk about this, it's you need to look forward. You need to listen to the customer and to yourself, and you need to set up your activity plans accordingly. By the way, this is where most companies don't even start right, because most organizations that do anything with activities and dynamics say, let me run reports to track the activities you did last week, last month, whatever it was. Well, that's great. That's a rear view mirror. It's important to have a rear view mirror, but you know what's a lot bigger than your rear view mirror? Your front window. You don't want to drive your car with a rear view mirror. What an inefficient way to do it. It's important to have it when the time is right, but what you really want to drive your car with is the front window. You want to look out into the future, see what's happening, and be ready for it. That's what scheduling is all about. Most CRM users have really never gotten up to speed with that. Most CRM leaders don't really have a good vision for that. So what is your schedule like? What is coming up in the future? How do you proactively take control of that at the right rhythm? Then you prepare. So now I've kind of laid out, here's what my day or my week or my month looks like. And now as I start getting into that, and usually this is a daily activity, it might occur a little less frequently, you look at it and say, what have I got scheduled today? Do I need to move some things around because stuff happens and your schedule gets crowded? But also, let's not just say, oh, I've got a call with Jeff Abels at 2 o'clock today. Great. But instead, let's look at that and say, who is Jeff Abels? What do I know about Jeff? What happened in the last meeting? How do I want to advance this? Is there any other information that's come into CRM that I need to know about that might have changed? Like, has he had a huge support issue that I don't want to be blindsided by when I talk to him? What do I need to know about this customer or this prospect to have a good, meaningful, substantive conversation with them? How do I serve them well? How do I serve myself and my company well at the same time? Then you're in your meeting, right? You execute, you react, and you're in a reactive mode a little bit too, right? So in the meeting, all that stuff you put together might go out the window. Jeff might say, by the way, we completely canceled that project that you and I had been talking about for 2 months. We've got these other bigger issues we need to talk about. Okay, I need to pivot. I can't stick to my agenda, right? But most of the time, it will probably be, hey, Jeff, last time we talked, you had said you wanted a quote, which I sent, and you were going to share that with management. How did that go? By the way, here's a new white paper we wrote that might help you prove out the benefit of it, whatever it is. But I am ready to talk to Jeff and have a meaningful conversation with him based on all the information I've had before. But I'm also prepared to pivot. Now, reality is most reps, whether you're a customer service rep or a sales rep or a marketing person, we live in this orange box, right? We pick up the phone when it rings, or we make that call when it comes up on our calendar, but we really haven't put much thought into it. And what I've found is if you put a little more thought into planning those, even if it means making a few less calls per day, if you can make those 80% of the calls you're still able to have a little more proactive, they're going to be way more productive than the ones you hope the customer has all the information they need to lead you in the conversation. And then the last thing, which is the one thing people focus on, if anything at all, with activity management and CRM, and that is track your meeting. Track that it happened, capture the notes, put the results into it, understand what happened so you can improve, and notice the bold face at the bottom of it. This is the virtuous cycle. Remember I talked about the vicious cycle. Part of the vicious cycle when you're reactive is at the end of the meeting, you say, yes, we need to talk again next week. But you leave the ball in the customer's court, or you try to make a mental reminder to do it. You don't have good follow-up. CRM makes it easy to say, I've put my notes in here. Now, before I click complete on this activity, let me schedule the next one, and maybe you can give your user some tools to make this faster and easier so that I never let a customer slip through the cracks again. I never get into that position where I say, wow, I thought it was only 2 weeks ago that I talked to this person, but it's been 2 months since I've talked to this person, and I should be talking to them more frequently than that. So scheduling your next follow-up, that makes it a virtuous process. Now, one thing I want to identify with all this is when you look at this, you may feel kind of like, hey, this is a lot. You know, our group's not used to doing this at all. I don't want to give the perception that you're spending 80% of your time doing this proactive stuff. The reality is, this is where you're still going to spend most of your time. You're going to continue to be focused on having those discussions, doing that follow-up, doing the things you're already doing, but hopefully being a little more prepared for on the front end, taking a little better notes on the back end, and constantly following up as you go throughout the process. A little bit of time set up to be proactive makes this reactive mode much more effective when you're reacting and having those conversations than if you didn't do it. So these 4 things: scheduling up front, doing some listening to yourself and to your customer, preparing, really understanding them and developing a good agenda, reacting and executing, the connecting with them that you need to do, and then tracking your results, knowing what you did, improving it in the future, and never letting anything slip through the cracks. So saying that back to you again, but using different words, it's about 4 things: listening, understanding, connecting, and knowing. We have found that these are true of every human relationship, whether it's your relationship with yourself, doing your own proactive planning, or your loved one, or your customer. So these are the things we're going to keep coming back to. This is what I want to build your agenda around. And we call that being powered by luck because we love acronyms. We think this is a simple one, but we've also found it can absolutely change the foundation that you're building CRM on top of. If you say, how do we help our people do this better, either in aggregate by listening and running gigantic analytics reports and making strategic decisions, or at a very detailed level, one-on-one, life-on-life, relationship-on-relationship. It works in both cases. We're talking about one-on-one in today's session. So that's our vision, that's our plan. How do we make it happen in CRM? How do we give our people the tools they need to do this better than they can right now? And remember, what I'm talking about now, it's the easy part, right? And I'm not saying it's easy, but it's changing our behavior and getting our people to actually do something with this that is going to be the most difficult. So understand that's a difficult challenge you have in front of you. Here's the same 4 segments I just talked about, the same 4 quadrants, the luck overview. One thing I want to mention to you as you get into this is I always say adapt, don't adopt. And what I mean by that is I've tried to pull together what we see generally work for most clients, but what generally works for most clients perfectly works for nobody. So look at this and say, let me grab some ideas. Let me understand our culture, our people, the way we have to operate, and let me overlay these in a way that's meaningful and helpful to them, right? So I don't want to overprescribe, understand the nuances of your workplace. Nowhere have we ever done exactly the same thing twice because you need to understand your unique situation. So as you get into it, a few decisions you're going to need to make. And if you're not quite sure what I'm talking about on this slide, don't worry, come back to it again later. I think these things will make sense to you, but let me go through them really quickly. First of all, how are you handling the scheduling component? Is it central or is it individual or some combination? For example, you might say, hey, when we're doing inbound leads, we have an inbound department and their follow-ups are scheduled for them almost automatically. They have almost no control over that. We're going to handle that for them. On the other hand, you might have a field sales team. You say, these folks have to be equipped to do almost all of their own scheduling. And you might have hybrids where multiple things like that are going on. So think a little bit about that. When you consider who do I need to follow up with and at what cadence, are you going to be more account-based or contact-based with it? I understand there's also leads, a little bit of a separate deal, but when you think about your existing customers or your qualified prospects, are you focused more on, I want to make sure each company gets followed up on at least once a month, for example, or are you an account-based marketing organization? You say, this company is really like 30 different companies, and I need to focus on the contacts in that company, not just the 1 or 2 people that I have a relationship with. So in general, if you're selling more enterprise level, you might be more account-based. But if you're selling more to smaller businesses, you might be more contact-based with what you're doing. And again, you might be hybrid, but understand that as you get into it. How will you decide what neglected looks like? I'm not going to describe that one because I have a slide for it later. What's the standard follow-up process flow? How do you guys kind of handle the cadence of continuously staying in touch with somebody? Is there a point at which someone's disqualified and you would not ever follow up with them again? Agree on where you capture notes. I think I need to do a whole session on this. I'd love to hear this in the feedback if you think it would be helpful. But sort of a, for once and for all, where is the best place to capture notes in Dynamics? Because you can capture them in many different places, and the right place depends on who you are. So there's some methods that work there, but what I suggest to you is, since activities have so many note-taking components to them, this is an important question to answer as you get into this. Where are we going to put those notes so that everyone knows where to go to find them? And what's going to be replaced? Reports and other things. Perfect world, ideally, you're not saying, hey, everybody, we've come up with this great new idea to do activity management. And by the way, it's one more thing you have to do. But instead, ideally, you say, you know what? When we do this and do this well, here's this thing you're not going to have to do anymore. Like, oh, that Excel spreadsheet you have to fill out every week, telling people what your action plan is for the next week or what you did last week. We're not going to do that anymore because we're going to be able to pull that directly out of Dynamics. So I hope you have something like this that you've done before that you can eliminate, because it always makes it easier for your crew if you can say, I'm doing something to lighten your load. At the same time, I'm adding something that's going to be a little bit new and different for you. Okay, so we're in the scheduling quadrant now. So let's talk about the recommended approach and what you want to do as you think about how do I equip my people to be better at scheduling, to be better at looking forward and planning. So first of all, your objectives. Number one objective in my experience is if you can get your crew to say 100% of my daily work comes from my Dynamics activity list. That might be really tough for people who aren't comfortable with it all, especially tough for people who maybe have had some other method for doing this for many, many years and they don't want to change. I get it. We don't like change. Nobody does. But if we can't all do it, then we'll all have an excuse not to do it. We've got to all get on the same page. So 100% of your activity list each day is coming directly from Dynamics. Hey, wait a minute, does that mean my internal sales meetings? Sure, absolutely, why not? Doesn't need to be regarding a customer, but it means I go to one place and I can see everything I've got to do. Not, Outlook for half my schedule, and CRM for the other half of my schedule. Work on cleanup. You got to help to keep lists short and manageable. I'll give you a few ideas for that as we get into it. What I mean by that is if someone says, okay, I'm doing my daily planning and I'm looking at my today's list and I have 357 different things to try to get to do today, they're going to throw up their hands, quit, and go away. So that might still happen sometimes. Sometimes an avalanche of things can gradually build up and all of a sudden you get to the end of the month and you scheduled too much. Give them tools so they can rapidly move stuff around. So they can carve out that 350 and say, here's 300 that don't matter. Here's the 50 I'm going to focus on this week. Make it simple and clean. Long lists are overwhelming for your users. Manage slippage. So you need to help people to say, I've got to review things that do slip through the cracks. The goal is to set up processes where very little slips through the cracks. You'll never quite hit that goal. So now we need views that help us find things that maybe we missed. Outlook is a great tool for the rapid cleanup I used earlier. I think it does a little better than Dynamics does still. Review your calendar for locations and work types. So when you're getting proactive, you can start to say, look, I know the human brain works where if I'm spending Tuesday calling maintenance agreement renewal people, and then Wednesday calling on new product sales leads, I'm probably going to be way more productive than if I intermingle both of those lists and try to go back and forth, switching hats depending on what the conversation is. So try to build around that. And also location. If I am going to be location centric, many of us aren't as location centric anymore, but don't have a meeting on Monday on the west side of town and Monday afternoon on the east side of town, and then do the same thing on Tuesday. Do all your west side meetings one day, do all your east side meetings another day if you possibly can, and work in another meeting each day as a result. And don't forget, last bullet here, a very important one, leave time for reactive work. So it's easy, and part of the reason I think we get frustrated and become very reactive is we have this beautiful plan built out, and then life happens, reality happens, and we've got to react to some things. And all of a sudden, our whole schedule is blown up, and we're overwhelmed, and we just kind of give up, and it's easier to stay in reactive mode. Be reactively proactive, be proactively reactive. And what that means is understand and anticipate things are going to happen every day that you're going to need to respond to. So don't block out all 8 hours of your day and expect to be able to be proactive for that time. Know your own rhythms. You know, maybe it's only an hour or two that you can be proactive a day. Maybe it's 7 hours you can be proactive a day. Whatever it is, leave those gaps in schedule so that when that complaint comes in, when that urgent need comes in, you don't have to take the rest of your day and blow it up because you've carved it up the wrong way. So what can help you with the scheduling? So Sales Insight, Assistant, and AI can both do some helpful things. Some of them are helpful, some not so much. So we like to leave a lot of the capabilities on that are available in these solutions. But remember, it can get overwhelming. The list can get too long to manage. And some of this stuff can really, if you're reasonably good at being proactive on your own and following good processes for activity management, the reminders are often reminding you about things that you're already on top of. So they kind of become distractions. So, so some of the things we like to see people do are things like, you know, the email reminders we think is super helpful. Like that set reminder, if I don't receive a reply by X date, then proactively reply. You can see that over here. This is part of, I believe, Sales Insight. I apologize if the names aren't quite right. Microsoft has changed these so much and haven't looked at these slides in several months, but you can actually set this up. I think this is super helpful. So I can say, I'm sending Jeff this quote that he asked for. And instead of me having to go to my calendar and say, call Jeff in 2 weeks if he hasn't responded back to this email yet, instead I can say, hey, when I send this email, remind me if Jeff hasn't responded back to do something then. Now it's one less item on my to-do list that doesn't need to be there and distract me until it does need to be there, until it says, hey, it's been too long, add this back to your list and take care of it. Relationship analytics cards, those can be really powerful. Most of your alerts can come in there. The cool thing is a lot of this is now managed by Power Automate also. So if you haven't looked at these in a while, in the old days I mean about 1.5 years ago, they were a little more static. You could click some check boxes to decide what cards you wanted to have appear. Now you can use Power Automate to create your own custom relationship analytics cards. Those can do some of the things I'm about to show you next. But again, It also depends on what you want to license, right? Do you want to pay for the sales AI add-in, sales insights that gives you some of those capabilities, or do you want to leverage more of what's out of the box with Dynamics? Regardless of which way you go, the same process I'm about to show you will apply. You'll just do some of it in the Sales AI or really the Power Automate interface. I'm going to focus more on the core out-of-the-box CRM interface. So what else can we do with CRM to help our users schedule, to help them kind of plan out their day a little bit? So first of all, neglected items is a really important part of this. Neglected, there's an out-of-the-box set of reports, by the way. I think it's called neglected accounts. There's several of them, neglected accounts, cases, opportunities, maybe leads or something like that. Those are reports, the old style reports, and it's not easy to find, and they never were great for manipulating. It took a lot of extra steps to get to them, but that can be a starting point, so you can play around with that and see what's out there. Ideally, what most organizations and individuals in organizations say is, look, not all of us as users want to be on the same cadence, and even so, I don't want to be on the same follow-up cadence with every account or contact or case or whoever it is that I'm following up with. If this is a 5-star account and really important to us, we've got to retain a great relationship, I want to make sure I'm touching base with them really regularly. On the other hand, if this is a distant prospect that asks for 2 quotes a year and buys something every 5 years, I might not want to follow up with them at the same level, but I don't want them to slip through the cracks completely either. So here's a simple way you can start with this. You're probably familiar with Dynamics 365 views already, so I'm assuming that. If I'm looking at my accounts right now, notice one of the things I have in here is I've said, how often do I want to follow up with this account? And when was the date of last follow-up, and how many days has it been since that follow-up? So these are 3 things I want to put on here. Now, there's a distinct reason why I want to put each one of these on here. Follow-up frequency, the user gets to choose this. Date and number of days. Date I can calculate using a calculated field type, but I can't create a view around a date as easily as I can around a number. So I'm also going to create and put this number out there for my view. I'll talk about how we do all that in just a second. So the first and simplest part of this process to give our users some control is we're going to say, I'm going to create a custom field, a drop-down box called follow-up frequency. Now, I've put numbers of days in here. Yours might be different. You could even just have it be a number, and they key that in. I find that much flexibility kind of confusing for users. They need something that's kind of a shorter list to pick from. So in this case, we said, okay, it's a drop down. We have follow-up days between 7 and 365 days between follow-ups, excuse me. So it's real simple to add that field. Now, one thing to note about that field, why did I put A through F there? Well, one is humanly, psychologically, it gives them something to say, you know, this is kind of my account rating, right? This is my A account. Not sure we say an F account should get any follow-up, so maybe it's not a perfect metaphor. But also, it helps with sorting. So when I give them this view saying, show me my accounts that are neglected, my accounts that haven't been followed up and the designated number of days I've set for them, what I don't want to do is have them in all sorts of random order here. I want to have the A accounts at the very top of the list. So by preceding this name with A, I'm going to get all of my A's first. So if all I have time to do this week is follow up with my A accounts, that's great. That's a lot better than following with 1 A account and 5 B's and 3 D's. Let's focus on the A's that we need to follow up with. And we can get to the others later, or we can build our business case for we need more headcount because there's not enough time for one person to do all of this. So that list is the first thing I set up. I set up that option set to make that happen. Now my user can choose exactly what they want to do, right? And I've already mentioned all the stuff on this slide. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to create this roll-up calculated field to track the date the last activity was completed on. So some settings here, and if you're an administrator and you know how to do this, great. If you're not, don't worry. You can take these slides, or you can just tell someone, here's what I want to do, and they can do it for you. But I want to give you the big idea. So what you want to do is you want to say from that account, and remember, I'm being account centric. You might do this on the lead or the opportunity or the contact or all of those different things. I'm doing it from the account. So I'm saying, okay, I'm going to use child accounts too in this case. You may or may not want to do this, but I might say if I've got a hierarchy of accounts, I want to roll all these up to the parent account level. And I want to make sure that my users are trained to regard their activities to the account, because that's what I'm doing to do my roll up, right? So if it's regarded to the opportunity, probably isn't going to work here because that's not directly associated to the account. So keep that in mind as you do these things. There's a training component to it as well. And then also for child records. So now you can do a multi-roll-up if you want to. I didn't do that in this case, but if you want to say they can still regard it to the context of the opportunity, and I want to roll that up, you can. Just remember, you might have different instances where you don't want to do that. For example, I might say, I'm the sales rep. Just because a customer service person followed up on a case associated to this account doesn't mean I want the timer to get reset for me. So think about all those permutations as you set this up. But essentially, all you're doing is under that account, you're looking at all those activities that will show up in the timeline for the account, and you're saying, hey, go grab the most recent one, the maximum, the highest value date that has an end date in it, that has a status of completed. So I don't want stuff that's not done yet because I haven't followed up, but stuff that has now been completed, and stick that in that field for me. So I know, oh, it was July 17th was the last completed activity for this particular account. That's what I'm going to store in there. Then what I want to do is I want to use that date to create a calculated field that says how many days ago was that date? And that's going to get automatically updated on a regular basis too, because it's a calculated field. So I'll just do the difference in days between today's date and whatever that date was. And now I've got a nice number field stored in CRM that I can use to build my view. Why is that important for building my view? Well, here's exactly why. Sorry, I went back a slide. So my view, and if this looks scary to you, it's actually not. It's a 2-line filter, but we had to repeat it a bunch of times. So essentially what we said was, if we look at the very top there, hey, if the follow-up frequency is every 7 days, and the days since that last activity, that last field we calculated, is greater than 7, well, then they're going to be in this view. Well, wait, what if the follow-up frequency was every 30 days? Okay, then we're going to do 30 here as well. So you can see it's just these 2 items repeated a bunch of times, or means if any one of these 2 sets of items are true, put it into the view for me. So now I've got a nice convenient view that says, here's everyone who appears to be neglected based on the criteria you've given me about those accounts. I can go one place, I can pick those things out, and ideally what I do is, in my scheduling cadence, I look at that and say, let me go schedule activities with them. I don't use this view to actually make calls. I use this view to schedule what I'm going to do in the coming week. And with that schedule, I can be much more proactive with following up on them. Simple, but super powerful thing that you can do. Now, remember earlier I said you can use relationship insights with the same data. You still need to create the data, so you kind of follow the same process I did here to create your cards. Now, the difference with the cards is, remember, you see just a few of those at a time, depending on where you are in CRM. This gives you a view with everything in one view you can go work through. So both have their place. I like this because I like the idea of proactive scheduling, not just waiting for an AI to pop up an alert for you. Now, you can also calculate, there's a lot of ways you can do this. I've kind of tried the simplest approach to show you. You can use workflows or now Power Automate to calculate those fields instead of using the aggregate field values in there and those kinds of things. So not one size fits all, not one way is a perfect way for everybody. If you've got a different way that you prefer to do things, that's perfectly fine. Now, another thing you can do is what's called sales cadencing. And there are a number of sales cadencing solutions out there. You can build your own custom sales cadences using workflows or now Power Automate. There's 2 pieces built into Dynamics. One is called Playbooks, and it's available if you're Dynamics 365 for Sales Online. Another one is called the Sales Accelerator. It's still in preview mode, but it is part of Sales Intelligence, so extra licensing to get that available. There's another one crossed out down there. I left it on the list for the moment, so if you've heard of it, you'll know it does not exist anymore. So there was one called Sales Spark that was created by a third party. When Sales Accelerator came out, they just kind of decided we're going to shut our doors and we're not going to compete with Microsoft on that. It's a shame. It was a great product. I already miss it. We were using it. What sales cadencing does is it helps you automate the process of reminding people to do things in a way that doesn't add a ton of activities to their list for them. So things like, hey, I want to have, well, I'll give you an example. In fact, I'll go to this next slide when we talk about it. For one of our clients, they said, we need this. They're actually an on-prem client, unfortunately, so they don't have access to some of the same things other people do. They're the one I mentioned earlier that said, hey, we know it takes about 5 contacts with a lead to actually close the deal. So they said, we want a cadence that looks like this. A new web lead gets created. We want to send them an email immediately. we want to send them an email immediately, and by the way, it's a personal email from who it's been assigned to. If that person's had to do nothing, and this person that signed up on our website immediately gets like, oh wow, Jeff got my information, he sent me this email, and here's his number if I want to call him before he manages to get back to me. It waits 1 day, it schedules a call, it waits for that call to be completed before it does anything else. So I'm Jeff, I make that call. It's not going to start adding these other activities to my list until I check that call off as complete. But it's also going to monitor my status on those things. So I might say, I want to break the cadence right now. I just called this customer, had a great conversation with them, and it's taken a turn. I don't want anything automatic to happen anymore. I'll take control from here. Or conversely, I might say, disqualify them. I had a call with them, and this is never going to go anywhere. Let's not have any more automated actions happening. So I can interrupt the cadence anytime I want to interrupt the cadence. So that's kind of what sales cadencing is all about. And the Playbooks functionality is pretty cool in that you can put together playbooks that kind of do cadencing. I don't think Microsoft really sells it as cadencing. It's sort of pseudo cadencing. But the idea behind a playbook is it says, here's a certain sequence of actions that we're going to plan based on a playbook that gets assigned to someone. So the playbook might be anything from, I'm working on an opportunity and the key decision maker changed. Okay, I have a standard playbook to go find and reconnect with and rebuild relationship with that new key person. Execute that playbook and it will kind of walk me through doing that. Or I've got a new lead, here's my playbook for following up with that new lead. So we've got a little blog on understanding playbooks. It's admittedly a bit outdated. In fact, one really nice thing that Microsoft has done with playbooks since the time we wrote that blog is you used to have to go into the playbook entity to see the list of activities. Now they allow those activities to go directly under the entity they're associated with. So old school was, I'm on the opportunity, oh, there's a playbook. I got to go click the playbook, open it up to see the activities. New school is that playbook's active and all those activities have been added to the opportunity. So it's easier for me to see them as a user. It's easier for me to work my list. So that's pretty powerful. Sales Accelerator, kind of a level of magnitude further. And it really is a sales cadencing solution. So you can go design your sequences. You can integrate those with scoring, so you can alter them based on the score that a lead or an opportunity has. And you can assign those into prioritized work lists for you. So pretty powerful cadencing solution. Cadencing solutions, by the way, have been around for quite some time. They're somewhat new to Dynamics, but they've been around there on third-party products outside of Dynamics for quite some time. So they're pretty proven, definitely something worth looking at to add to your activity management quiver. I'm not going to focus on this section today for two reasons. One is because we're going to be a little short on time. I usually do this session in 90 minutes, but another is because, for those of you who don't know, the CRM for Outlook, what they call the client or the legacy CRM for Outlook, has been deprecated. So that will no longer be supported or modified in the future, and soon you won't be able to choose to install it at all anymore. So this used to be around which version of this Outlook integration is better for us to use, and you don't have a choice anymore. The good news is the app does some things much better than the old legacy client did, both from a technology and support perspective, but also from a user perspective. The bad news is, as far as I know, I haven't looked at this lately, it does not do a good job with task and call management, which to me is a really important part of activity management. So you need a strategy to help your users through that and decide where those things get done. Bear that in mind as you do this. Hopefully, my theory is Microsoft didn't do much with that because they're going to integrate it with the new to-do tool instead of the old Outlook task tool. And maybe that's going to happen. I haven't seen any information on that. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just might not have seen it yet. So I'm going to skip that whole section for now then, and just know that, you know, how to choose, you need to go to the app anyway. If you're on the old legacy client, if you don't have a plan to get to that app yet, you need one ASAP, because the future is happening very soon and you need to get to it. So talk to your partner, talk to us, whoever you need to talk to, but make sure you get on that. Okay, second quadrant is this idea of preparing. We've scheduled, but now you've got to prepare for those meetings. So what we want to do, we want to be able to look at my daily schedule. Now, when you do that, I'm a fan of looking at that the evening before. There's a brain science behind that, makes a lot of sense, but some people might do it the morning of. You want to move things around. Do I need to schedule things to different dates? I want to capture pre-notes. I want to put my planning in there. What am I going to do in this meeting? What are my expectations? And I want an intuitive way to sort my activities. So everything before that is really just human process stuff that you need to think about. This last thing, intuitive activity sorting, not as easy to do as you might think. So if you've ever looked at all the date fields on activity records in Dynamics, there are a lot of them. And in fact, they've even added a few more in the last few years here. Helpful additions, but can be confusing. So here it is, depending on what type of activity you're looking at. The main entity dates might have different names, but here's how they kind of all roll up. So understanding how to sort them without confusing the end user can be confusing in and of itself. So go back to this to kind of see how they look. Here's the reason why it's a problem. Out of the box, when you first install Dynamics, it uses the modified date for sorting. Well, in reality, is the modified date the sequence you want to see something in, right? For an email, modified date is probably the date it was sent. That probably works pretty well. That doesn't change much. But what about that appointment that I had on Tuesday? And then I didn't really remember to go back and edit it and add notes to it until Saturday. And then, by the way, I realized I hadn't even closed it until that next Tuesday, so I closed it. And now the modified date on that activity is a full week after it actually happened. And the same goes for tasks and other things. So now all of a sudden, when I look at my activity list, I'm looking at them not in the sequence that they actually occurred, or maybe not in the sequence that they're planned in the future, right? Of all things, if I'm using modified date for my future things, if I create something that I want to do tomorrow, and then I create another thing I want to do next week, and I'm looking at it by modified date, the thing next week is going to show up higher on my list than the thing tomorrow. And I want to see the thing I'm doing next first. So what do we do about all that to reliably do this? Here's what we suggest. We suggest that, first of all, on your task, phone call, and appointment entities, you turn the due date into a required field. This may not always be popular. For an appointment, it kind of is required. You've got to have the date on there. But tasks and phone calls, a lot of people will say, well, I've got a list of ones I want to make, but I don't really have a date, right? They're kind of like, when I have time, I'll make those ones. So this is going to mean you don't get to do that anymore. But you can give them another option, like say, well, if you don't want to have a date, just assign them to the end of the year or the year 2999 or something like that. So they automatically fall to the bottom of the list if you want to do that. But that helps you to then have a solid date in that date field when you do something with it. Then in workflow or Power Automate, store the real date in the sort date field. So what you can do is you can say, use the sort date field to put all your dates in. That's a lot of workflows. Every time you do an email, you're going to have to open it up again via workflow, change the sort date, close it again as one example. But if you store it in the due date field, you won't have to open up the email again because it takes care of that automatically. All these tasks, phone calls, and appointments, you've automatically captured that for. That's going to be in there. So you're not going to have nearly as many due dates to do all of that. And then for your sort, you're going to sort by due or sort date, depending on which one of those you selected to store your value in. And what we suggest are two slightly varied sort sequences, one that's focused on views that have closed activities only in them, and another one that might have open only or open and closed activities in the same view. And there's little cutouts on the side there. Those kind of give you an example of why you want to sort those things differently based on the completion status of something. I won't go into all the details there. It's a little confusing, but for the person who has to do the work, looking at that might help them scratch their heads and understand exactly why. Okay, and I have a hard stop right at 1, so I'm going to move a little quickly through the rest of this. Happy to get back together with you guys again if you'd like to. So now you're in the thing that everyone does the most, right? You're reacting. So you want to help people to capture their notes, remember the decisions you need to make about that, and you want to help them remember to keep their lists short and manageable so they're not overwhelmed by a bunch of things that they haven't prioritized well on any given day. As you do that, one thing to remember is, remember we talked about luck? Luck is happening again in real time when you're doing this, right? You think you've prepared for this, but now you need to continue to listen and understand, connect, and know in real time as you engage with this person. So there's a lot for them to be thinking about. You want their lives to be super simple. Couple of really simple things. First of all, a simple training thing. This is the modern user interface, but there's the potential to do this in the legacy user interface too. You can use the sidebar to rapidly work through a list, such as a list of activities. So instead of having to go to activity, add your notes to the activity, complete the activity, go back to the list of activities, choose the next activity. You can instead just click down through the activities and automatically update the form here. You might think that's not that much time savings, but remember, someone who's spending 80% of their time working through lists like this, it's a big time saver for them. The other thing you can do is you can use quick views over here on the activity form. And what you may not have known, a cool feature of quick views is they respond to whatever the regarding field is. So I can create an opportunity quick view, an account quick view, a lead quick view, and a case quick view, whatever I want to do. And I can put all of those quick views on this when I design the form. And it's only going to show the quick view relevant to whatever this is regarding. So now instead of the user having to open up a task or an activity and then say, I can't see much at all about the account in this, now I got to go open up another form and look at that and then come back and it's confusing. I can give them a lot of data directly on that form, save them time, make their lives easier. May not be everything they need, but if it only works even 10, 20% of the time, it's going to save them a lot of time. And confusion. Users have a lot of difficulty with related record types, I think. And then remember just the virtuous process of this. How can we help people to schedule follow-ups after every single call that they make? So part of that's training. Hey, when should you do this? So we kind of gave you worst case. At the end of each week, look at everything, make sure you schedule follow-ups. Best case, take your notes and schedule your follow-ups in real time as the meeting happens. More realistically, it's probably going to be twice a day to daily that you get around to doing those things, and that's okay. Don't go beyond a week. A lot of companies do monthly. So as we look at this last thing, some of the approaches to doing this, to go through these very quickly, you can use Quick Create to enable them to create their follow-up activities quickly. Problem is, it requires a lot of extra clicking and it requires re-entering data on those Quick Create forms. Task flows are about to be completely deprecated, so this one is a non-starter anyway, but task flows were never a great way to do this. So what you can do is you can add some, well, the perfect world thing, by the way, solutions that we've implemented for some of our clients is use Power Automate and Power App to do this, and you can embed that directly in the form. I did a session that was recorded on integrating Power Apps with Dynamics. You can look at that as a starting point if you want to look at doing that for yourself. But if you don't want to go to that level of detail, if you don't have that level of time or technical depth, you can just add some custom fields to each of your activity types. So now whenever the user is completing an activity, they see this additional set of fields, I call them follow-up fields, right over there. Hey, what kind of follow-up do you want to do? What's the subject? And if you're smart, you grab the subject directly out of the form that they're already on. So if it's the same subject, they don't have to change it, save them those keystrokes. What's the date you want to do it on? You can auto-populate that a week out and let them change it if they want to. And what's the priority for it? And you can add full description and all that if you want to. We find this is enough in many cases. So now when they save that activity and they're done with it, it automatically runs a workflow on the back end that you would also set up to say, create that follow-up activity type on the scheduled date so that the user doesn't have to remember to go manually create it, saving them a ton of keystrokes. If you use good business rules with it, you can even give them a warning when they try to save the form saying, hey, it doesn't look like you scheduled a follow-up. Do you want to do that? And allow them to return to the form and make that happen. And this is what the workflow would look like to make that happen. Nothing too sophisticated, pretty easy to set that up. By the way, when following up on emails, the email integration is so good, we don't think you need to do that. You can just use the built-in follow-up capabilities when looking at email integration to schedule your email follow-ups. So, big picture, this is what we just walked through, helping your users get through all of that and turning that vicious cycle into the virtuous cycle of listen, understand, connect, and know. So, I'm not going to be able to talk about adoption today. We're going to need to move on. I will try to pause a second for any questions that come up if you have any. And I would challenge you, by the way, to go watch this video. Here's a link to the video. If you have never seen the big rocks, little rocks analogy, or even if you haven't seen it for a while, go watch this. It's called the mayonnaise jar. Go to gotluck.link/bigrocks or send me your email afterwards and I'll send you all of this. But it's about a 5-minute, super inspiring, kind of getting back down to the fundamentals of Why is activity management so important to us as human beings and to us as people who want to run effective businesses? So make sure you take a couple seconds to watch that. I think that that's incredibly important because really it is the only asset we have. If we can give our people better tools to help them manage time, time is the only thing we have. Effectively managing the 24 hours each one of us are given in our day, that's what makes us different from one another and how successful we are, how happy we are, how much we achieve the goals that we exist to achieve. So wrapping up, Robin, I'm going to let you open it up for questions here in a second. But while Robin's looking at that, if you want some of those things, please reach out. All the links I sent out there are there for you. I'll send you a copy of all those if you want. We have another ebook called Activity Management, Why Adopt a CRM Activity Management Process. Awesome tool for helping to convince your team to adopt activity management. If you like luck, you can go grab a copy of the book online. And hey, this is what we do. So if you're looking for help with a CRM implementation partner or Microsoft 365, or even just need help designing some of the things we talked about today, if you're looking for help with that, we're here to serve you. Robin, do we have any questions?
Thanks, Jeff. No, I am not seeing a question, just one comment. So glad you mentioned sort date. I am at my third company in over 8 years using Dynamics 365, and none of them have configured sort date on activities. I'm currently retroactively implementing sort date for activities, which is much more complicated than configuring sort date from launch. All implementation partners should advise to configure sort date when designing CRM pre-launch. Not one of the 4 implementation partners have ever advised to set up sort date properly. This would have saved so much time working with activities.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment. I really appreciate it. And it's interesting. I actually sat in a session with another partner who said, we don't think you need to use activities. CRM is kind of a reference system to look up information. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying it's a different opinion. But I definitely have a different opinion on that. It's very gratifying to hear that there are people out there who are taking that knowledge into new implementations. Tweet that out there or something. Keep it going, because most people just don't even know about it.
Yeah, that's great. And no, I'm not seeing any other questions, just that one comment. So I'll go ahead and just say thanks very much, Jeff, and thanks everyone for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks so much, Robin.